So you've helped families, thousands of families with these very issues. So share
Mhm.
with me, has anything really bad ever happened to somebody just in your experience where somebody set boundaries and then they held firm to them and then like everything went kaput on them?
Ooh, that's a really good question. In my work, especially in the past, I worked with a lot of folks that had serious mental health issues, and there might have been domestic violence involved and that kind of thing. So, one thing I want to name is that on the extreme end, one reason why we might not set boundaries is because we're literally afraid and for good reason. So, I just want to say
Mhm.
that too, that we might be really afraid and for good reason. Usually, the worst case scenario with setting a boundary is that someone calls you on that and runs right over it. This is
Mhm.
where consequences come into play. It does no good to set boundaries if you don't have clear consequences for the boundaries. So I see people do that a lot where they set a boundary and then they say what the consequence is and then they don't follow through with the consequence. But the consequence has to be something you can really live with and commit to. So that's a hard thing to happen. I mean, again, at the extreme end, let's say it's a relationship, not just with a client, but maybe with a spouse or with someone that you really love, and you're saying, if you keep doing this, I will not stay in this
Mhm.
relationship, and it will devastate me. And I don't want it to be like this, but I won't stay. That's a devastating consequence. But you don't want to name that unless you really mean it, unless it's that important. So that's a
Mhm.
hard thing that can happen. But yes, I have definitely worked with people who had really terrible consequences. And we knew that might happen if they set this particular boundary with someone. We knew that that person might try to do some pretty harmful things. So it has to be worth it. It has to be really worth it.
And do we stop at that point realizing there could be a difficult consequence that you may have to enforce? And you say, but I'm willing to do that because I deserve to be treated with respect. And as a human, you deserve to have somebody follow through on these boundaries just so that you don't run wild with everybody that you're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, that self-worth is, I have these four pillars of boundaries that I coach people on. And the very first one and the most essential one is self-worth. Are you worth it? Do you feel worth it? Do you feel like having this boundary will give you something so big that's so important to your self-worth that you can enforce the boundary? Right. So as far as business owners, right, I'll give you a quick example of this and around self-worth is I have a business owner that I work with who had a pretty difficult negative situation with an employee who was very well connected in the community. So her fear was if I fire the person was toxic, toxic to have as an employee, right? Her fear was if I fire this person, they're going to talk about me. They're going to make my name mud in the community. They're going to say terrible things about me. And what I said to her is, you're probably right. So you have a choice to make. Is it worth it to keep her on and to be held emotionally hostage? Or is it worth it to deal with the aftermath, which will also be hard? Right. So,
Mhm.
one of the things about setting boundaries is that we're often feeling like we're in between two impossible situations. There's no graceful way to out, there's no great way to do it, there's no way where everybody wins. That's
Mhm.
the nature of it. So, you have to decide what's more important because there might be negative consequences that you have to deal with. Is it worth it? Right. Am I worth it?
I remember one time, to this day, I will never forgive myself for what happened, but I kept an employee about a year too long
Mm-hmm.
because they were doing a lot of things right, but they were doing more things wrong than they were doing right. And they were costing the company a lot of money and causing a lot of stress. And I remember one day I was out jogging and I asked myself, how much would I pay to make this problem go away?
Ooh,
And I realized I would
good.
be willing to pay their salary twice. And then I said, then why am I paying their salary once to keep them? If I would be willing to pay it twice to make them go away.
So
And
good.
it was just this weird epiphany that I was like, why are they still here? And I literally went home from that jogging experience and I fired them that day. I said, we're not doing this anymore. This is not worth the
That
stress.
is so good. That is such a good example. Yes, right there.